far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's panel discussion on allyship and coalition building. My name is Kim Linnaeus, and I'll be your panel discussion moderator for today. We'll be unpacking allyship, what that looks like, making meaningful impact, and community building. I come from years of experience in as a board member in the city, in Toronto and in Montreal, and also currently work at TD supporting the Black customer segments and 2SLG Plus customer segments in building sponsorships and meaningful relationships across the country. With that, I'm so excited to dive into our discussion today and hearing from three brilliant and incredible experts. Let's dive into their bios and introductions. Ola, first off, Ola Onyebuha is a Nigerian-Canadian multi-award winning entrepreneur, keynote speaker, and community builder. A polymath operating across immigration consulting, travel counseling, nonprofit leadership, and financial services. She holds an MBA in entrepreneurship and technology management, brings experience across 5 Canadian institutions, and is currently a graduate student and research assistant at Brock University, supporting SSHRC-funded Canada-wide academic research project. As the visionary founder of the Black Business and Professional Network, BBPN, she led a team of 10 co-founding members over 5 years before intentionally transitioning leadership to a new governance era and was subsequently voted back by the board, where she now serves as chair. She today leads 7th Laurel Immigration Counseling as director and also serves on other boards across Canada and Nigeria. A passion explorer at heart, she is also a TICO certified travel counselor and for a travel agent who turns her love of discovering the world into curated travel experiences for others. So I'm so looking forward to hearing from you, Ola. Next up, we have 100 ABC Women honoree Marie Clark Walker, who has represented Canadian workers on the global stage for over 2 decades. As a leader at the Canadian Labour Congress, she brought the voices of women, racialized, and marginalized workers to international forums, including the International Labour Organization in Geneva, where she championed the adoption of ILO Convention 190 on violence and harassment in the world of work. Through her work in the coalition of Black trade unionists and international women's committees, she built bridges of solidarity across North America, the Caribbean, Africa, and beyond. A tireless advocate for equity, human rights, and decent work, she has strengthened connections between Canadian struggles and global movements for justice and dignity. And last but not least, Angela J. Carter, with more than 4 decades of leadership across journalism, corporate communications, nonprofit, executive management, and health system reform. Angela J. Carter bridges grassroots realities with institutional decision-making. Her work focuses on dismantling racism and systemic inequities, advancing integrated models of care, holding institutions accountable, and ensuring that communities most affected by structural barriers actively shape the systems intended to serve them. As I mentioned, we have 3 awesome experts and leaders with us today, so I'm sure this is going to be a really lively and informative discussion. All right, as I mentioned, we're going to split this discussion up into 3 segments. The first being community building, second being allyship, and last, how we're going to build lasting and meaningful impact. So first question about community building is for Ola. Who showed up for you in your early years of community building?
Thank you so much for having me here, Kim. Hi, wonderful women. It's been an amazing thing to reflect today coming on this program, my 12 plus years journey. You know, when it started, when I arrived as an international student, a wife, a mom of 2 toddlers in one of the most intensive MBA programs that Canada ever offered, a 2 year condensed into one. As at that time, what I needed was not sympathy. That was what I was really thinking. I just needed someone to see my capacity and could see me because I have left all my family, all that I ever knew, behind, and I'm here. And exactly that happened through a Canadian. She noticed that I was passionate about something, and I was literally doing it effortlessly, showing people destination, come to New Brunswick, come and explore, and all of that. And what she did then was just say, okay, this is something you do passionately. How about if I guide you and I put you across to ABC? And that was what led to the foundation of my first business that I founded just a few months after graduation as an international student and a temporary worker in 2016 after I graduated. Now, when you look at things like that, you want to ask yourself, do you just want to fold your arms and keep going? No, I thought about if somebody who never knew me saw a potential in me and could actually invest in me, I have no choice but to pay it forward. And that was what I started doing with Oak Ridge Consulting then. And when COVID hit, I realized that a lot of international students whom have used my platform to say, hey, discover this location, and they were coming in, they were getting stranded. What I had to do then was just to turn my basement into like an address for them because Canada actually had this law in place that if you're going to be coming in, you must have an address. I just went on Kijiji, set up the place, and started giving that address to those people. And it helped them to settle. It helped them to have their first meal, having journey for years. And before you know it, it became a passion that I turned into entrepreneurship. And when you look at that, it might be nothing, but it was something to me because that was the foundation of giving without expecting nothing in return. But it now became something lucrative. And it also led to understanding some challenges that entrepreneurs do have at every stage of their life. And that was all led to the birth of the Black Business and Professional Network in New Brunswick in the same 2020. What am I saying here? It's like a journey. When you look at it, when we peel the layers, it came from a place of passion, not knowing where you belong, but somebody somewhere just saw me, listened to me, didn't just sympathize with me and say, oh, so sorry, I wish I can help you, and then did nothing. Invested in me, encouraged me that I am enough, I can do this. And I was able to start that. And Oak Ridge Consulting, like I said, laid the foundation of what I have been doing today. And from there, I've gone on to found like four different organizations, for profit and non-for-profit, just because a Canadian invested in me and believed in me. Well, does it always go well for other people? No. Sometimes some people reach out to you, it doesn't land what you really hoped for. But then, have I also experienced such things? Yes. But did I stop? No. I don't stop. And I would just want to enjoin anybody watching us today to know that whenever you reach out and you're trying to form an ally, you would always have different opinion. You might raise some concerns that some people don't like, right? But then try to give a feedback that is honest, unbiased, and is not kind of subjective. Then you can always see that you've planted something in someone. The Canadians who showed up for me never saw something or someone they wanted to pity. They saw my value and they took a chance at that. And in that case, I believe that many a times being an ally starts from a lived experience of something. And when you experience it, you ask yourself, what do I want to do with it? Do I just want to sit and fold my hands? Or do I want to pay it forward and build a foundation that a community can actually spring off? And I present to you the story of how I journeyed from being an international student to a temporary foreign worker to a business owner, which transitioned to becoming a non-for-profit community leader that has also advocated for other people. So that's what allyship means for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ola. Marie, on the topic of community building, what are the key ingredients for building strong coalitions across different communities and movements?
Well, I think that strong coalitions need to be built on trust, um, and the various relationships that you encounter, as well as a shared commitment to justice. We can't build coalitions simply around moments of crisis, which oftentimes we see. We have to invest in these relationships a lot before the difficult moments arise. I think also respect for different experiences and recognizing that communities may arrive at the work from different perspectives is extremely important to understand. And we also have to understand that our struggles are interconnected, whether it's workers' rights, racial justice, gender equity, housing, migrant justice. I talk about this on a number I've talked about this on a number of these panels. They're not just separate issues, they are interconnected. And so people live these realities simultaneously. And so strong coalitions require humility, honest conversation, and a willingness to stand together, even when the issue is not ours. And oftentimes in Canada, and in the communities that we're in, we see that people won't get involved until it's something that impacts them. And we need to move away from that, because if it's impacting you today, it's going to impact, or if it's impacting somebody else today, it's going to impact you tomorrow, and vice versa. So it's really important for you to stand with communities. If I could also, Kim, just jump in a little bit on what Ola, the question that you asked Ola, because I think that that's also important in terms of how we grow, how our journey starts. So, I mean, for me, my journey started in my own community. And the support that I got from my own community definitely helped because when I got into the trade union movement, there weren't a lot of leaders who looked like me. At the Canadian Labour Congress, I was the first woman, first Black woman, first racialized woman in one of those positions of leadership in the top four. And if I didn't have my community, so I had, you know, the women's committee, the racial justice, people from the racial justice committees that were there supporting. But I think that if I didn't have my community behind me, it would have been much more difficult because that community gave me strength. And that community also came with experiences that went, you know, came before me and during. So I was able to build on that. Again, I looked and took my cues from people like Bromley Armstrong, Charlie Roach, Dudley Laws, my mother, Beverly Johnson, who had been in the movement, but not just those. So June Veacock, Carmen Henry, names that you'll hear amongst the 100 ABC women as well. But I also took leadership and learned leadership internationally from sitting with my father around tables where political leaders were, the Michael Manleys of the world, the Rosie Douglases, right? The Ralph Gonzalez, the Mia Motleys, those people, Maurice Bishops, who also made me sit and listen and watch what they were doing, what they were conversing about, and take some of those lessons. One of the most important lessons that I learned during that was to stand on my principles. Do not let, you know, anything violate my principles and values. And that came from, you know, people who were in leadership during the Grenada Revolution. And I took that with me throughout my entire career, and it still stands with me today. So the people that are around you, the people that surround you with love, the people that surround you with protection, hold on to them. Even if sometimes you think that what they're telling you or what they're showing you is not necessarily what it is that you're going to need, I guarantee you, you will need those messages, those words of support later on down the road.
And Marie, how would you recommend people, I guess, hold on to advice that might not be relevant right now, but they can tap into later on?
So there are a couple ways we can do that. Keep the people close, you know, so they're always saying those things in your ear. But also have a book. Have a book and write those little nuggets down. Again, you might not need it today, but it will come in handy down the road.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And now over to Angela. What does an effective partnership across communities look like in practice beyond good intentions and public statements of support?
Thank you, Kim, and thanks so much for this great opportunity to sit beside some incredible women and listen to their stories, and and great stories they do have. So from my perspective, an effective partnership begins with clarity and honesty, as Marie said. Too often we use the word partnership when really we mean consultation or referrals or an endorsement. And those things have value, but they are not the same as partnership. A true partnership requires shared purpose, shared responsibility, and some level of shared power. True partnership means never showing up to a community with a finished plan. We see this very often. It's like bringing a blank notebook to the first meeting and saying, what are your existing priorities? And how can our infrastructure support them? So we know how large institutions usually operate. I'm sure many people who are listening would say, have seen this. They invite you to collaborate with them on an initiative. You sit at a table, you give your input, and you wait for some more meetings to discuss progress and provide more input. But the next thing you hear is, oh, the plan is completed and ready to be implemented, and you're invited to a meeting and to celebrate that. Supposedly, it was done in collaboration with the community, yet very little of the community's input can be found in the final version. So, and then what is worse is when peer organizations from your community ask you to collaborate with them, especially on a funding proposal. You provide input, you provide a letter of support, they get the funding, and your participation has been reduced to receiving updates on what they have been doing. And in some cases, you don't hear anything. So, so some of the things I would recommend when considering a partnership is to be clear about why you want to partner. All right. Are you trying to partner to solve a specific problem, improve access, influence policy, build trust, strengthen services? If the purpose is vague, the partnership will often become symbolic rather than useful. And we need to understand what each partner brings. Community brings, very often a community, especially a racialized community, a grassroots community, would bring lived experience, cultural knowledge, relationships, trust, history, wisdom. And the institution, the larger quote unquote partner, may bring the resources in infrastructure, policy influence, and things like that. But when you go into a partnership, it does not rank one form of knowledge over the other. It recognizes that both are necessary. Very often we are not like that. We need to think openly about the power. Who controls the funding? Who sets the agenda? Who speaks publicly? Who gets the credit? Who carries the risk if something goes wrong? Right? These are not very comfortable questions, but they are necessary questions to ensure that everybody understand what that partnership is about. I could name a number of partnerships I've been into. Some of them really work well, and some of them have been terrible, right? But most that have been terrible are the ones that we did not sit down at the beginning and really discuss what this partnership is about, and all of these ask these questions. An effective partnership means ensuring that the community leaders are properly compensated for their emotional labor and expertise, and that their names are prominently placed and not buried in footnotes. Because that's another thing. You partner on something with someone, and who gets the credit? You've done a lot of the work, who gets the credit? And very often within communities like ours, the Black community, which is many small grassroots organizations, that happens. And we know when funding is available, especially when funding is available for communities, a specific community, a mainstream organization, and I know there's an organization we partner with that does not like to be called mainstream. They are totally mainstream, but they don't want to be called mainstream. Their reason is, majority of our staff are racialized, so we are not mainstream. We tell them mainstream has nothing to do for you hire. It is based on the culture, the structure of your organization. They would come and say, we'll partner with you, right, on funding that's for our community. They get the funding, and then we are relegated to, they give you some stipend to do something, but they take the brunt of it and all the credit. That's not partnership. Partnership must produce something meaningful for the communities involved, right? So authentic partnership is not inviting people to sit at a table. It's about sharing the budget to build an entirely new table together. Nor is it measured by the number of organizations listed on a flyer or website. It is measured by whether the outcome is more equitable, more responsive, more accessible, and more impactful because those partners came together and worked together.
I love that. I think that's really insightful, Angela. Before we dive into the allyship portion, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what it would look like. You spoke heavily about one side of the partnership, the pitch, I guess, for partnership or lack thereof. How can people on the receiving end who might be asked to be part of a partnership that might actually really be a consultation or something else, advocate for themselves?
They need to be able to stand up, and I agree. I remember there was a session where we had discussions about family violence, and there were a number of partners that said we need to go after funding for this because of the issues. And one of the partners said to me, she said, "Oh, Angela, a white woman. She said, okay, I'll go forward for the funding and we can flow some through to you. I said, no, no. I said, I'm sorry. We are going forward for the funding ourselves. We know what it is we want to offer. We know what it is. It's going to be culturally responsive to our community. We want to get that funding ourselves. We are going to apply for ourselves. She immediately apologized. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry. I did not understand really what I was doing there, really. And I will support you. I will support you wherever you want to go because you're right. You should go for the funding. I can't come in and do that for you. And she became one of our strongest allies up to this day. That was when I was executive director of Roots Community Services. I've retired now. She is she and her organization, extremely strong supporter and ally. She felt really bad because, again, she came in with that savior mentality kind of way because, well, we know very, very often Black organizations apply for funding, especially others are doing it. We don't normally get the funding. We were successful in the funding. And that program we got the funding from is one of the strongest, a very strong program running now. It's a program for men, for Black men. And, and she speaks about it. And she said it was a lesson learned for her. That's what allyship is about. But you need to stand up. You need to have the strength to say, you know what? No, let us do it. You support us from the back. We need to know when we step forward and when people step backward.
Thanks, Angela. That's a perfect segue into our allyship portion. What assumptions, Ola, this one's for you. What assumptions do well-meaning allies consistently bring into coalition spaces that might quietly undermine the work? And how do you address that without losing the relationship? Angela just gave a really great example. I would love to hear maybe some of your thoughts there.
Thank you so much. I just believe that these are issues that really happens across communities, and I love that Angela shared that experience. And it speaks to knowing our worth, right? Knowing what you stand for and be able to push back, politely. So, and I will just speak briefly on those assumptions. And one of it is one most damaging or even disappointing assumption that I've encountered in over a decade of working in professional organizations before I moved to non-for-profit is, the assumption of gratitude, the idea that because you're showing up now, you hold them that difference in how the work needs to get done. And I've seen it more so in the non-for-profit space these days where, somebody say, oh, you know what? I know somebody, I would introduce you to this person with the expectation over time that you hold them something. You must really, really do something for them in return. For me, that is not allyship. It is transactional inclusion that is kind of dressed up in a language of, oh, we all belong here. But that's not it, And I could speak to an example of when the vision of BBPN came forward. I knew I caught the moment, and I knew immediately within my capacity that I cannot do it alone. Some people actually goes all the way to say, you know what, I want to be the person to take all the credits. I just want to be the person showing up. I want to, take it and run with it and let the world know that I'm the one doing all of these things at the expense of those volunteers who often don't get to sit at the table, but they do the heavy lifting. So what we try to do in BBPN is to make sure that we give credit to whom it is due. And a lot of the people that actually transition through BBPN as of today move from not just being volunteers to be recognized for their work, to have their name, stamped on the projects. Like the current president of BBPN came in 2022 as an MBA practicum student. And before you know it, he transitioned and he became the president. So for me, allyship is not just saying, oh, let's work together, let's collaborate. Sometimes collaboration, bring your letter of support. BBPN as an organization also has given certain letter of support. In fact, there's an organization somewhere, Central Canada, that got our letter of support, got the idea, we introduced and invited that organization to New Brunswick. The next minute, this organization bypassed us and went behind to do projects with other organizations without even us knowing until later. So for me, I believe that we as racialized leaders, most times, when you're talking about allyship, what does allyship mean to you is what you need to define. Define it yourself first. When you define it, you're able to pitch it to somebody. And if the person feels that this is not my definition of allyship, then you know that you're not going all the way. So you don't lead people on, right? So for me, like I said, anytime I see that there is going to be like a conflict, we always try to make sure that we document. Some people will not like your approach. It's better they know who you are from the get-go, and then they will be able to see if truly we can work together on this project. If not, we're still respecting one another, to stay true. And if in future our paths cross again, we're still here to work. And also sometimes you see some partners going quiet, it's always good to just make sure you check in, reach out, say, oh, I noticed something has shifted. Is there anything you want us to address? For me, that is also a healthy way to have a conversation, to have closure. Most times in communities that I've worked with, I see some people come across and say, oh, you know what, that organization, no, they're not good, don't work with them, don't work with them. I tell people, I want to experience people for who they are, not by what people say to me. Because when you form an opinion, you might be doing yourself a great disservice by listening to that person, and you never know what actually happened in the context of what the experience looked like. So I tell people I like to experience. And every day as a person of faith, when I'm going out, I pray for discernment, because sometimes you get into a space, the personality of some people would really help you to connect from the get-go, to know what they stand for in terms of values and all of that. So, like I said, in my practice, I don't form an opinion. I want to work with everybody. I come to the table with equity, with a clean hands, to make sure that this is an open book. Write what you want me to do with it. And over the time, has it really worked? Yes, it has worked, because majority of the people that we worked with at BBPN know that we have the funding, but they trust us to know that we will not deceive them. If we tell you we are working with you, we are working with you. And to me, trust, like Angela and Marie said earlier, is critical. If you don't trust anybody, why would you be able to sleep and close your eyes beside the person? So thank you for giving me opportunity to also build on what my leaders, because when I look at the age and all of that and your experience, I know you've journeyed this along. We are still learning, but it's really great to see how this conversation is, connecting. Because last week we talked about governance, and when you look at allyship again, allyship is a sum totality of what the leadership foundation is all about. If the governance does not have a clear process, a clear structure where trust is embedded in the organization, it becomes very, very challenging for you to model, for you to see people model and follow through, So governance also is a function of what allyship needs to be, and how that organization carries such that strength, the spirit, and the value over time. So for me, that's all I've got to share. And I look forward to maybe chiming in if I have any other suggestions or opinion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ola. And you really hit it right on the nose there with tying it back to what Marie was saying about building trust. I was thinking about that as you were speaking. To be able to build the relationship and community, it does take trust. And even what you were saying in your early days in community building, who was able to support you and who showed up for you, that took trust on both sides. So really thank you for that and sharing that. And I totally echo what you said about being able to learn from two seasoned experts like Marie and Angela and yourself. So Marie, what does authentic allyship look like in practice beyond just statements of solidarity? You kind of poked at logos splashed around and that kind of performative behavior. What does that look like?
Oh, yes. A lot of the times when we hear about allyship, it is very much performative. So it's definitely not words alone. It's about the actions that you take. It's about the accountability. It's about the consistency. Are you going to be there all the time, or is it just for this one issue? Right? So it means for me showing up even when there is no spotlight, when the issue doesn't necessarily directly affect you. As I said in my first response, a lot of people only act on things when it's impacting them, or when they see that there is something for them to gain or benefit. And that's not allyship. You need to be there all the time. It means listening very, very seriously, active listening within communities, particularly to those communities who are most impacted. It means believing people's lived experiences, and being willing to challenge the systems of inequity within your own space, your own community, your own organization, right? True allyship also requires a sharing, and I think Angela touched on this, a sharing of power. It means opening doors for others. It means using your position and your privilege to create opportunities for others. I know that in the labor movement and in social justice work, we talk about solidarity. And a colleague of mine talks about, while we talk about solidarity forever, for most people, it's solidarity whenever, not forever. And we need to move away from that. Um, Angela talked about change in culture, and I can go back to a session in 2001. So the labor movement took a long time, a very, very long time to change, keeping in mind that it was Black workers who built communities, right? Who built organizations, who built this country, Black, Indigenous, racialized workers. And it wasn't until 1992 that the Canadian Labour Congress had a seat for racialized people. So getting the perspective, and it's taken all the way into the 2000s for them to ensure that there are equity seats. So there are bodies that are speaking on behalf of particular equity communities and working in solidarity and in coalition with the other equity groups. In 2001, for the first time in the history of the organization, one of the leaders, a white woman, Nancy Rich, decided to have a women's retreat. Now, they had women's retreats for decades prior to that. But at this women's retreat, what was different was that they invited women who were not on the women's committee. And at that time, the women's committee was predominantly white. I don't think there were any racialized people on that women's committee. So it was actually my first invite to anything that the Women's Committee was doing at the Canadian Labour Congress. And there were other Black women there, there were Indigenous women. There had always been women from the 2 LGBTQ community that were part of that structure. So it was mostly the Indigenous racialized Black women who were not at that working within that structure. And one of the key things that we did was talk about the importance of changing the structure of the organization and the culture of the organization. And until that was done, nothing would change. And we were pleasantly surprised because the women in that committee listened. And that's from that, it was at that point that they came and asked me to run, and went and asked other people to run. But that didn't mean that at the time, it still wasn't performative, right? Because you really didn't see any change until the mid 2000s, so 2014, when we started actually campaigning and running campaigns around working while Black. Prior to that, they hadn't done anything. It was around that same time that we started doing work on the missing and murdered Indigenous women. Prior to that, there really wasn't anything. So again, just all of that as an example to say that we can talk about these things. And we know that the labor movement, community organizations talk about these things all the time. But until you put your money where your mouth is, right, and actually start doing and actually start, incorporating the other work that you're doing or the equity issues into the other work that you're doing, it's basically performative. And that is part of building authentic allyship, making sure that we're there acting, doing the work from the very beginning, not you coming to us with a document that's already completed or a plan that's already done and saying, okay, put in your 2 cents now. No, we need to be there from the very beginning and all the way through the process. And so if that's not happening, the allyship and the coalition building is not authentic.
Thank you, Marie. Angela, with that, as we tie up the conversation on allyship specifically, what practical steps can organizations take to move beyond surface level allyship and partnership toward a deeper and more accountable relationship? So Marie shared a lot of really insightful advice on putting your money where your mouth is, moving away from the performance. What are some of, I guess, your tips or feedback on how we can move away from that as well?
Yeah, thank you for that. And building on what both Marie and Ola said, I mean, they have some great insight as well. But one of the first thing is to understand that allyship is not an identity we claim. People will want to say, I'm an ally. It is a practice we have to demonstrate over time, right? So service level allyship, yeah, often shows up when people or organizations are willing to make statements, attend events or express concerns, but they are less willing to change how decisions are made, how resources are distributed, or again, that power word, how power is shared. And we have seen this played out time and time again, especially over the last 6 years since the pandemic. So moving beyond surface level allyship requires intentionality, humility, and structural change. We can't do this without the structure, the systems changing. So we have to listen. We have to listen before designing solutions. So many communities, particularly Black, Indigenous, racialized, newcomers, and other equity denied communities have been studied and invited to share their stories many times. But listening must lead to action. If there's no action, there's no partnership. And it must be action together, not action by one group and not the other. There must be investment in relationships before there's a crisis, as Marie earlier stated. We often see institutions reach out to communities when something has gone wrong, like a public incident, a funding opportunity, a reputational concern, something like that. But trust cannot be built, the trust word again, cannot be built only in moments of urgency. It has to be built in ordinary times through consistent presence, follow through, and respect. And we know during the COVID, so many organizations, academics and research institutes started to, like crazy, going into the Black community, going into South Asian community, into Indigenous communities. And everybody wants now to study and get more information and more insight into what is going on. We had to tell them, hey, hold it, stop, hold on. You can't do that to our community, right? You all work together, come back, really put your thing, come back, then talk to us. Then come and talk to us about how we can move forward together. And actually, it's interesting, I'm doing research now with Trillium Health Partners, and it's true that because I've been pushing back on them saying, no, you cannot do this to our communities. That's not how you build trust. That's not how you get information. That's not how you create and build coalition, right? For a better society. So you have to push back. You have to stand and you have to push back. So and resources must be shared in ways that are fair. So excuse me. An effective partnership means that when a well-funded organization partners with a grassroots group, the larger group handles the administrative heavy lifting, and I heard Ola use that term, while letting the grassroots lead in the strategy. Doing this helps build capacity within the smaller organization, right? Because too often the community partners are expected to volunteer their knowledge, while larger institutions are funded to manage the product. That's not building capacity or coalition within that organization. They would never grow if it continues to be that way. So an allyship must include advocacy. If you are in rooms where equity denied communities are not present or not being heard, as an ally, you need to use your voice to open up space, challenge assumptions, and push for decisions that reflect equity and justice, and ensure that the voices that are not being heard are heard. I remember during my tenure as the ED of Roots Community Services, I had some strong allyship from community partners that are not from the Black, African, or Caribbean communities, right? I had to develop a partnership with some of them. They're from the South Asian communities. And I had developed partnerships with them prior to the pandemic. But these two partners during the pandemic showed their true mettle when they vocally supported me in a push to obtain a seat at the table, to voice the concerns of our community, challenge assumptions of the community, and secure adequate funding to ensure our communities were not ignored. And they were behind me all the way. And we were able to do that, get it, and really make a big difference during the COVID within our Black community here in the Peel region. So we need to shift away from that service level allyship and people talking that I'm an ally, to really looking at deeper relationships. It goes back to relationships. What does this really mean, right? And it must include budgets, funding, policies, leadership decisions, advocacy, and long-term commitment. It cannot be just a one-time event or thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela. And that leads us so perfectly into the last few minutes of our discussion on how we build lasting and meaningful impact. In our discussion today, we talked about the importance of trust, empathy, and empathy in community building. We talked about integrity and performativeness and allyship and taking real and meaningful action. With that, and with all of that, for a question for the group, what does long-term and meaningful impact look like to you? And what does that take? What are the steps that organizations can take to get there?
If I could,
Please. Yeah.
I want to sort of meld that response with part of what was said in the last response from Angela, because I think she started to touch on the various things that are definitely needed. I think, first of all, organizations need to create meaningful pathways to leadership, because representation definitely matters, but representation alone is definitely not enough. People shouldn't be simply invited into spaces. They need to have, and it's part of what we've been talking about since the first question, right? They need to have authority, they need to have resources, they need to have support. If that's not there, then nothing that you do is going to survive. I think, secondly, organizations need to invest in continuous political education and learning, because allyship is not a destination, it's a practice. And so we have to do that education around what anti-racism is, what equity is, what labor rights, gender rights, et cetera, so that you can build those into whatever it is, the program that you're doing. Thirdly, organizations need to create spaces where difficult conversations can happen, because we're not always going to agree, but those conversations need to happen, and they need to happen honestly and respectfully. And so we need to create that space, because if we don't, we're not going to see real growth, because that real growth and allyship can come through discomfort, right? Because not everybody is going to agree with everything. And so it goes back to the whole issue of building trust. And so that building trust means acknowledging that harm when it happens and committing to doing better on the part of the ally. I think fourth, organizations should intentionally build relationships across communities, across movements. Again, going back to doing this before a crisis comes on. And that way we know that it's genuine, because, people can say, oh, yes, I'm working in coalition with organization X. But if that groundwork hasn't been done, if they're not supporting campaigns, if they're not sharing resources, if they're not showing up consistently, are they really an ally? And so, fifth thing, organizations need to examine where they allocate those resources, because your budget tells you what your priorities are, right? If equity and allyship are truly important, then resources should be directed towards leadership development, mentorship, femtorship, community partnerships, accessibility, and other initiatives that remove those barriers to participation. And I think, finally, mentorship and succession planning are essential. We talk about mentorship and femtorship, but very rarely do we talk about succession planning. And I think it's one of the most important lessons that I've learned in the labor movement, is that leadership isn't about holding space. It's about creating that space and making sure that the next group are coming up with that political education, with that, trust, with that, all the tools and that they're going to need, complete with the resources. So organizations have to intentionally support and mentor emerging leaders, particularly young people, and for those communities that have been traditionally excluded. If that is not there, then allyship can't flourish. It can't work.
Thanks so much for that, Marie. And we do have a question from the audience, specifically for Ms. Angela Carter. The question is, how do we get the buy-in and consistency from those who claim allyship? It often falls on and feels like such a burden for the racialized women to be the ones identified to take up the coalition building and community of care. So how do those allies show up and call in their non-racialized folks to make transformative change now with the slide back on DEI?
Wow. That's not an easy question. And the thing is, it has to be started long before, as we said, long before the incident or the crisis occurs. I will give my experience. I have been involved in community building for a long time. I've been over 40 years here in general, but here in Peel region for over 30 years. And I've built rapport and relationships with people over the time. When I took over as executive, and I'm from the corporate world primarily. Most of my life was being spent in corporate world, but even there, I was always working along in community. When I took over as executive director of Roots Community Services, well, it wasn't that name at that time. Again, I continue to build our relationships. I talk to people, listen to them, understand where they're coming from, learn what their organizations are about and what they're about, and understand what we wanted to do, stand on my principle. We knew what we are, a Black organization, an organization for the Black, African, and Caribbean communities, and we made no bones about that, pushed that. People wanted to say, but if you stick to that, you're not going to get the funding, you're not going to get this. No, as Marie said, you stand on your principle, don't change. We knew what we knew our community needed funding, our community needed support, our community needed people like us to help them. And we stuck to that and be bold and confident about it. Know exactly what it is you want, be able to speak confidently about your program, your mission, your vision, why it's necessary. Have all that information and be strong and stand on your principles. Build those collisions, explain it to people, have a coffee, go and have a drink with someone. Sometimes you're busy, but you need to take that time to build that rapport outside of needing something. So, and let your allies learn about you and your mission. And that's what we did. And that's why at times I could call on people to say, listen, hey, this is the situation, I need your support. And it's like, what do you want, Angela? It takes time. As Ola said too, it's not just one group, build across. You cannot just stay within your community. You have allies outside of your community. Build that. A lot of other communities have some of the same needs. One of the things you don't do is try to compete with the funders against each other. You don't want to do that. Sometimes it might be better for one person to go forward for a particular type of funding, and might be the other time it might be your turn. Don't everybody try to run and get the funding at the same time. One of the things when I came in, I didn't go into sports in a big way because there was another organization that was doing a lot of work in sports with youth. Why should I go and try to compete with them when they're down the road from me? We focus on something that's still that's needed within our community, and we built that up, right? So those are the things. Try to work together, look for common issues. There are so many common issues that we have without trying to step on each other or try to grab from each other, and just continue building those connections. And as I said, be frank. Learn about the funders, learn about funding. You might have to spend a lot more time than you expect to do the work, but don't. When you build that, and you can call on some allies that are backing you, and you have them really backing you, that is a relief in many cases, that there's someone you can call. I mean, I could have called and sent a text to people late in the night to say, hey, listen, I have a problem. You know what? I need this. I need to get a letter of support because I didn't realize I needed this letter. Can I get it by tomorrow? Yes, and I can get that letter by tomorrow. I can get them to back me. So it is a lifelong thing, put it that way. You have to continuously engage and build that relationship and that partnership, and that allyship will come along. It is not something that happens in the moment of time. It is something that develops over time.
Thank
The
you.
responsibility that we practice. It's not an identity, right?
Yeah, it's not an identity we claim. It's a practice.
Right.
Before we wrap up, Ola, was there anything that you'd like to add? I know you shared some really great insights, and a lot of the conversation was anchored in each of your points. So I just want to make sure that I don't miss anything. Ola, is there anything that you want to share? If not, I want to say right before we wrap up, thank you, ladies, so much for the really engaging discussion today. As you said, allyship is not an identity. And we need to put that on a t-shirt, I think. It's not an identity, it's something that's constantly and consistently developed. And I think, as you mentioned, it takes trust and lots of pouring into. So I want to thank you so, so much for sharing that today. And I encourage the audience, if you loved what you heard today and you want to continue the conversation, 100 APC Women will be hosting another panel discussion next Sunday. So please be sure to register for that as well. And really thank you again, everyone, for being in attendance today. Marie, Ola, and Angela, so grateful for the work that you're leading in community and driving towards meaningful and impactful change. Awesome. So I'll pass it over to Danielle to close things off. Thank you so much for everyone attending.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment. It's your time.